I barely finished school. Things weren't looking good for me, and I had no confidence. I didn't believe in myself, and I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to change something. And so I stopped taking drugs, and I got a job, and I started working myself up, and I started.
Awekenge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Asagot Toto.
I just want to say thank you so much for replying to my message of what made and able to have this initial conversation. And in terms of the way that, in terms of helping clients and also talk about mental well-being, something that at some point that as individuals we forget to talk about in terms of, or just try by any means to find that healing, or what Carl Jung used. I would like to quote a quote from Carl Jung. Something that once Carl Jung said, that there is no healing, but there is letting go. So it's something, as much as at some point I agree with, there are times that I agree with that quote. There are some times that I prefer the way of healing, because in the way healing, I believe that healing is a journey, and something that we all, a journey that at some point in our lives that we take. With those words, I would like to say thank you. Welcome to Mental Matters. Firstly, I just want to go into your story. And unfortunately, on your biography, you mentioned that you wrestled with your childhood and ancestral wounds. Can you elaborate on what these wounds were and how they affected your life?
Yeah, of course. First of all, there was intergenerational trauma in both my families. On the German side, the previous world wars, and on the Irish side, the hundreds of years of oppression, to the and the famine, of course, caused by this oppression and occupation. And the thing is that I've learned over the years, obviously, is that families that have intergenerational trauma, they try their best to, of course, let it go and heal it. And the challenge it becomes is a lot of times it gets suppressed, it doesn't get talked about, it becomes secrets because it's too difficult to talk about, or maybe people maybe feel guilty or shame, or they're maybe so far removed from it that they don't fully understand. They're a little bit dissociated from it, and so. That was the case in our family. Lots of trauma, and this, so I grew up in childhood. I love my parents, of course, and I'm grateful for them. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. And they were the perfect parents for me to be the person that I am today. And they had their own challenges. And I was a very sensitive kid growing up. I still am very sensitive and, very empathic. And I soaked up all these issues that my parents were dealing with. I soaked them up, and I found it difficult to be able to articulate these things. And, so this manifested in behaviors or patterns that I adopted in early childhood. I was early on, I was a thrill-seeking child. The first time we lived in Germany when we were growing up. I lived in Germany until I was 11, and then we moved to Ireland, where my mother's from. And in Germany, we lived in a neighborhood which was high crime. It was lots of drugs and violence, and at that time it was very tumultuous. Also in home, so to escape tension at home, I would go outside, but outside it was maybe at that age it seemed adventurous, but it was scary as well, right? There was drugs, there was gangs, people getting beaten up, and so early on as a child, when you're a child, up to a certain age, I think it's up to 10 years of age, your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet. And that's the area of your brain that is there for reasoning, for logic. And so what happens is when kids are in traumatic situations or events before the age of 11, a lot of times, because they can't reason yet, because that part of the brain is not fully developed yet, they take on beliefs that it's something to do with them. So early on, at a very early age, because of these environments that I grew up in, I thought there was something wrong with me. And I thought that the issues or the tension that was at home was because it was my fault or it was something about me. And so that's a very deep belief that I had, that I wasn't worthy of love. So I had to shut down at a very early age. When you shut down, you're not able to receive the love that's really around you. And so that's those were some of the beginnings of my life. And I had really good times. I discovered soccer when I was 8. I remember my father would drive me to all the practices, all the games across the cities, and I did really, really well. And that was really important for me, because I started learning about team sport, discipline, perseverance, what it means to play in a team, to be part of a team, a journey going on a season to win and lose, how to lose, how to win, how to be humble, how to be humble both in defeat and when you win. And so those were important lessons. And when we moved to Ireland, again, there was tension at home, and I escaped outside, and I went back to find people that reminded me of the bad high crime neighborhoods that I grew up in Germany, and I was basically surrounded, or I sort of associated myself with, starting to take drugs at an early age, at 13, drinking alcohol at the weekends, and really escaping all the emotions I had suppressed all my life, and not being able to receive the love that was really around me. And so when my dream of becoming a soccer professional came to an end when I was 15, I stopped playing soccer, football, and I just went all in on committing myself, living on the streets. And it was a very difficult time for me until the age of 17, or 18, I suffered from a drug overdose, and I ended up in the hospital, and I barely finished school. Things weren't looking good for me, and I had no confidence. I didn't believe in myself, and I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to change something. And so I stopped taking drugs, and I got a job, and I started working myself up, and I started in a company, and I started becoming a young leader at 20 years of age. I was a team leader in this company I worked for, and so slowly things started turning around for me. And I started then learning about meditation. I then went on and had a 11-year corporate career at Amazon Corporate, which brought me to the US. So I became very successful, and I gained a lot of material wealth. I had houses in the US, I had nice cars, and I had a beautiful girlfriend. But I had all this material wealth, and I was lucky that I came out from where I came from. Inside, I had a hole. I was constantly filling a hole. And, it was one of those holes where you think about a bucket that has a hole at the bottom. It was constantly stuffing the bucket, but everything was just coming. It wasn't filling up. It was like there was a hole at the bottom of the hole that I was filling. And so that's when I was 30 years of age, I had a major concussion. I went back to working at corporate, and when I was about 34, 35, I had a major awakening, and I had basically an ego suffered, I had the dark night of the soul, some people call it, or ego death, where, I had left corporate, and when I left corporate, it was my entire identity just fell apart. And I started then studying a lot. In the last 10 years, I started studying a lot of psychology, yoga, and I was doing yoga and meditation to really keep up with this high pace environment at Amazon Corporate. And so I was lucky I did that, because when I then left the corporate job, I had something to fall back on. I had some time to devote myself to a spiritual practice, which then opened up to my devotion now. I'm spiritually devoted to yoga, I'm currently studying Tantra and yoga, and as part of that work every day, I have a routine of breath work and physical yoga exercises and meditation every day, where I connect with my heart, and I make sure that my brain and my heart are in sync. And and then eventually I also, in my journey, once I knew after a corporate job, I knew I had a hole here that I needed to heal something. And so then I started really exploring all these different healing modalities. And at the very end then of this inquest, or I say end, I'm really at the beginning, I came across family constellations or systemic constellations, which is a healing modality, which now I'm a facilitator of, which I get certified in. So in a nutshell, that's my story.
It's quite an interesting story, and also a story that I believe it filled with resilience, and in terms of trying by any means to better yourself within what you have dealt with. And there are so many things that I just want to touch on, because I also believe that I grew up in an environment where these things that you mentioned, drugs, alcohol, gangs, were just part of the community. And if you weren't part of those things, you in a way, you were seen as weakness in a way, because all other kids were dealing with it. And at some point, I don't know how I survived it. In a way, I would say that I was blessed enough to not be part of it, because I've seen how it has its consequences within seeing other people, because in a way people have died young because of these such things of drugs and being in gangs. It's something that I saw it as a very negative thing. Whereas it pushed me in terms of not having friends, it pushed me of staying in an isolated place when it comes to going out. I didn't do that. In a way, I believe that I didn't enjoy my youth as a young person. And I just want to acknowledge that of having that step of trying to resolve their childhood trauma, that generational trauma, because as you spoke about oppression, but here and also in South Africa, as much as I didn't experience it, but my people that came before me did, in a way, which is apartheid back then. And I've seen how it has affected, especially my mother, and not realizing it as in a perspective of someone that didn't know the knowledge of, in terms of this thing of oppression. I would not say that I have experienced oppression, but I've seen how it affects people that have been there, people that have been just there in terms of experiencing it, and that trauma eventually passes on to the next generation. And another thing that I've realized is the fact that when you're dealing with mental health problems, you end up being this high-performing person. You end up being this stressed person that, as much as I have a mental health problem, I will keep on working. I will ignore it as that. And it's something quite interesting. I think I once mentioned it on my podcast, whereas as much as you might try by any means to run away from the fact that you're dealing with mental health issues, when it comes to mental health, you run away doing that work, and that fast-paced work in terms of, as you said, being on corporate. And it's something that you come to you when it comes for you, it comes in a sense of burnout, and you will not realize why you're always tired. As much as you are tired, you keep on moving and not realizing that it really has an effect on your mental well-being. In a way, my follow-up question goes to that, in terms of that, realizing that you have to leave corporate and trying entering a new field of psychology. How did that transition work, and how did you find ways to cope with the slow paced I wouldn't say that it's a high-driven field in terms of psychology, because you talk about emotions, whereas in business, there's a lot of aspects within it. How did you able to cope with the new field?
Yeah,